Good, good, good morning, sun. Good, good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good, good morning, sun. Good, good, good morning. Good morning. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good, good morning, sun.
And good morning. Today, I would like to talk about the concept of managing technical risk on ERP projects. In this case, I'm specifically talking about customizations or integrations. And in some cases, you might think that a given project is relatively simple. The customer wants to integrate A and B, send data from here to there, import this, export that. Pretty simple, right? Well, um, years of practice and failure have told me that it is not always simple, and you can get yourself into a surprising amount of trouble very quickly by not taking technical risk seriously from the very beginning and not anticipating it. So, I'm just going to share a very simple real world example that I've been dealing with for the last weeks, month. It's all dragged on. So, I'm kind of curious if there's some approach I'm missing. So, a customer is asking for a very simple Business Central integration, and everything I talk about is Business Central Online or SaaS, nothing on-prem. So the customer is a Business Central customer. They've been using Business Central. They're happy with it, and they say, hey, we have this external billing system. It's a SaaS service, a web-based service, and it is what we use to bill our customers. It has recurring bills, various invoicing features. I don't even know the details of it, but it handles their billing. And they say, we want to integrate the results of those transactions into Business Central. And I'm thinking invoices and line items and customers and complexity. They said, no, 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 no. We don't need any of that. All we want are the financial implications of all those invoices transferred and recorded in Business Central. So they just want general journals, or what I would call from the GP world journal entries. So they're going to debit and credit to record their financial transactions. It's like, oh, well, that's nice and simple, right? So whether it's by transaction or by day, I think they're going to summarize it by day that said, we have $20,000 worth of sales and $20,000 worth of receivables, for instance. So super simple. Maybe they have a couple different sales accounts, and maybe they have some cash receipts due to online credit card payments. No problem. It's basically just a few debits and credits, right? Pretty straightforward. So we have a SaaS billing system. We have Business Central Online. We need to import the financial transactions for those invoices into Business Central as general journals. And they say, well, we're familiar with Power Automate. We like it. We've used it. Can we use Power Automate? And during the call, we said, yeah, sure, that should work. Makes sense. And, nothing wrong with that, just as long as you're comfortable with it and that you think it'll work well for you. It should work for this scenario. Straightforward, right? Well, simple. Very, very simple. If you were to explain this to anyone, you've got the SaaS billing system, you've got Power Automate, and you've got Business Central. Now, the customer tells us the SaaS billing system has an API. They've used it, works fine, not a problem, has everything you might need. Guaranteed. Well, we know Power Automate can connect all sorts of stuff. They're like hundreds of connectors in Power Automate, plus you can do custom connectors, you can connect to web services, it can pull down JSON payloads, no problem, right? Well, then you get that data in the Power Automate, and there are BC connectors for Power Automate. So surely you can create records in Business Central, right? Very simple, like it's just a general journal import. So no problem. So how do you propose this? Like, it's just one integration. This is not a 120-hour project, right? This is a small project, and the customer's just asking for guidance. Maybe you'll help them get it set up and connected, but they're familiar with Power Automate. They're familiar with their billing system. They just kind of need help on the Business Central piece. So, like, what might this look like? Well, let's say that actually configuring Power Automate to connect to the billing system and connect to Business Central, like we're talking clicking here, right? We're not talking writing code. We're not talking doing anything crazy. It's Power Automate. So if you took your time, how long might that take? 4 hours of like actually configuring this flow? Like, let's just say that's in the ballpark, right? Well, stuff takes time, and you need to work out a few details, map some fields, figure out which field in the billing system you want in BC. So, okay, let's just say that with the call and some design work and some discussions and review, let's say you have some project management or project overhead. Let's just give that 4 hours. That's pretty generous. And then let's say that you build this and you test this and you look at it and the customer's like, well, can we get this in the description? Or we actually want this field from the billing system to show up here in Business Central, and these amounts or these GL accounts need to be mapped, whatever. Let's say that you have 2 hours to, refine things, work out a few kinks, and finish up. Pretty simple, right? 10 hours. Now, you could say, well, that's high. Well, I mean, how much lower can you go on any given task? Like, would you actually propose a 4-hour project? Things start to get tight if you get under 8 hours, in my opinion, like just a day. Like, I try not to estimate less than, say, 4 hours on any given task, and 8 hours for the entire project. That's cutting it kind of lean. Well, say, well, what if you have other contingencies and stuff, and maybe you need more time for X, Y, and Z? Well, then you're proposing more than 10 hours for this very simple integration. And my thinking is always, well, what if someone else from a competing firm or a colleague looks at this objectively? And the customer asks for a general journal import into BC using Power Automate, and they see a proposal of 16 hours. They might think, 16 hours? What are you doing? What are you doing for 16 hours? It's kind of sketchy. And 24 hours? Crazy, right? 24 hours to do this? It's 3 little graphics and 2 arrows. Like, it's one transaction type. It's one way. There's only a handful of fields. Like, how can you, in good conscience, responsibly propose a 24-hour or 40-hour project for this? So just based on experience, like, okay, we're kind of in the 8 to 12-hour ballpark. Less than 8 starts to get kind of, you just don't have enough time to deal with changes or unexpected details. Above, say, 12 hours, and it's like, I don't know how responsible that is. Like, maybe you could propose it and just say, hey, we might not use it, but there you go. But I'm thinking, this is 10 hours. That's reasonable for this simple transaction, right? Well, if you were to propose 10 hours for this project, you'd be dead. Your project would have been a failure. Game over. And I happen to know this from firsthand experience, because this was a real world project. Fortunately, I did not propose 10 hours, but that's just like what we were discussing, what's going through our heads, what felt kind of in the ballpark, and we would have been in trouble. We would have gone over budget, we would not have been able to deliver, and we would have had a guaranteed dissatisfied customer, period. Like, no question about it. And we would not have been able to deliver this even close to 10 hours, based on my experience. Why is that? You might ask. Well, it is due to unknown or undiscovered technical risks. You would assume that these technologies work, right? It's a reasonable assumption. It's Power Automate. You have a web service connector, you have a BC connector. Kind of the assumption is that these are products that exist and maintained by Microsoft and the SaaS billing system provider, and like these things should kind of work. Well, turns out they don't, or they don't work the way you would think, or they have some bugs. So if you propose 10 hours to do this project, that is assuming everything works properly and perfectly and things go smoothly. Maybe the customer has a few changes, like change the description field. Simple stuff, right? That's just a field remapping or, concatenation, whatever. But that 10 hours does not anticipate showstopper technical issues that you could not have anticipated. Well, what are you talking about, Steve? Well, you would think that the Business Central Journal API works. And if you think that, you would be mistaken. And I'm talking about the BC Web API, the v2.0 Web API. First of all, if you look at the BC Journal API, you will discover there are some limitations. And you won't know what those limitations are until you actually try and use that journal API for that situation or that transaction. You can look at it and say, oh, I see fields. I can use Postman. I can push data in and out. Great, it works. And then the customer says, well, we want this type of journal. You're like, ooh, it doesn't support that. That's right. You can only import generic general financial journals. You cannot import a sale journal, a purchase journal, or a job journal. No, not available. Only a general journal. Okay? So that would be the first thing you might potentially run into, depending on the transaction. So you may say, yes, I've used a journal API. And then the customer says, no, I want this type of journal. You're dead. Your project is dead. Second, you'll set up your journal, then you'll try to insert some journal lines. And at that point, you will have discovered there is a glaring bug in the Business Central Journal Line Web API page. It will literally prevent you from importing a journal line with a balancing account. It doesn't work. And you're like, how is that possible, Steve? You must be mistaken. You must be doing something wrong. How does anyone use this? I do not know. I do not know the answer to that. I've been asked that multiple times. How has this Journal Line API webpage been in Business Central for multiple years with the exact same code as I went as far back as BC 17, the bug is still there. So from BC 17 to 19.5, the Journal Line API webpage, the BC Web API, has had a bug. It simply does not work. Okay, so the technical folks among you would say, well, we know a way to get around that. We can create a custom API page, which I'll get to. Fine. Well, then you will discover bugs in the Power Automate BC connector. And you're like, how is that possible? Certainly, by version 3, they would have figured this out and it would work. You would be mistaken. First of all, if you try to use it, it just doesn't work with the Journal Line API. You will get an inexplicable error. Well, then you will talk to people, such as what I did, and they'll say, it works for me. You're like, What? It doesn't work for me. I've tried it 27 times. You'll get on a call like I did. They will show you it works for them. You will show them it doesn't work for you. And you'll both sit there on the call scratching your heads like, I don't get it. Well, then I'll talk to someone else. It doesn't work for them. So I'm currently at a 50-50. I know 2 people who say it works for them, and I and a colleague have proven that it does not work for us. So flip a coin as to whether it will work for your customer. So you'll have this proposal, it'll get approved, you'll go to set it up, boom, dead in the water because their Power Automate Business Central connector for journal lines simply doesn't work. There's no way you would know that. And to this day, there's no way I will know whether a given Power Automate connector with a given Business Central Web API will work. Even if it works for me, it may not work for that customer in their environment, and I don't know why yet. So then someone will tell you, as someone advised me, well, maybe you need to enable the Power Automate experimental features. That will allow you to use a beta version, essentially an unreleased version of the Business Central connector. You could try that, but the word experimental might give you pause, and enabling experimental features in a production integration, in my experience, is not the greatest approach to solving problems for customers. So even if you got it to work, you are so far out on a limb, and they clearly say, hey, these features may break, these features may disappear, these features may just stop working, we may abandon this. So I would never advise a customer to use experimental features in a production integration, even if it does happen to solve the problem. So let's say you just magically overcome all these technical hurdles within your 10-hour budget, right? Keep that in mind. Well, then I'm advised you will eventually run into a Business Central version 20 OAuth and batch command issue. I don't know what that looks like yet because I haven't run into it, I haven't tested it, but I've been warned that this potentially exists. So even if you deliver on version 19.5, version 20 rolls out in the next month, bam, you're dead, your customer is dissatisfied. How's your 10 hours looking now? Then the customer has higher volume. 2 weeks later, 2 months later, 6 months later, things stop working. They're like, we processed 500 transactions, only 250 made it into Business Central. Oh, well, after a couple hours of research, you will discover there is an issue. If you happen to use this feature, there's an issue with BC webhook callbacks to Power Automate, some type of throttling or limiting issue. And even if you issue, say, 500 callbacks, randomly, only a certain number will make it into Power Automate to trigger your flow. How would you have known? Well, there is the one unknown for sure, because you won't have worked with that billing system, that SaaS billing system. I don't even remember the name. And anytime I've learned through a very, very painful lesson, anytime you're working with an external third-party API, you have to consider that as very high risk. No matter what anyone tells you, whether it works, whether it's great, whether it has all the fields you could possibly want, very high risk. So let's say you encounter issues with that billing system API and both technical issues and potential limitations of that API. How's your 10 hours looking now? So let's just do a hypothetical. You had a 10-hour budget. Seems simple at the time, right? Let's say you had, because of the problems, you had 8 hours of testing and troubleshooting trying to get this thing to work, and it still doesn't work. So then let's say you bang out a custom journal line API page to fix the known bug in that page. Let's say that's 4 hours. And then in order to use that journal line API with your corrected thing, let's say that you need to do a custom Power Automate connector because the out-of-the-box create record v3 doesn't work. Let's say you cobble that together in 2 hours. Well, then you run into the OAuth batch issue. You need to research that. You can't solve it, but You spent 2 hours on that to just realize that was the cause of the issue. Well, then you run into issues with the billing system API, 4 hours gone, heartbeat. And then you have support tickets for Microsoft and you have support tickets for the billing system, easy 2 hours gone there. Well, all this additional effort has resulted in additional project management, so you easily burn 4 hours of phone calls with the customer, internal team, developer, etc. You're at 26 hours for your 10-hour, very simple project. RIP. Your project is dead. You're not happy. The customer is certainly not happy. You are 2.6 times, 260% above budget or of your budget. So not a good scenario. And been there. I have the battle scars from doing this exact type of situation. Now, in this case, I was very lucky. I didn't actually propose the 10 hours. And we'll talk about how you can avoid this pain by incurring other costs, right? There is no free lunch. There's no way to magically avoid these issues, to magically have the proper budget and make everyone happy. You have to compromise somewhere. So how do you manage or mitigate this potential technical risk? There may be no risks. You may go down and everything goes perfectly and you're done in 8 hours. Everyone's happy. But there's the chance, and it's greater than zero. It's much greater than zero chance. So one way is, before you propose and quote, you can say, well, have we done this specific thing before? If the answer is no, even if you've done kind of something close, if you haven't done this specific thing before, you prototype it really quickly. And I count this as just a learning, educational experience, like, oh, I haven't done this specific scenario before. Let me just check it out. Let me spend an hour or two, just kind of scope it out, make sure that there are no obvious landmines that I'm going to run into. That's what I did here. And let's say I'm 3 weeks into this prototype and it's just problem after problem after bug after bug. And I'm just like, not possible given how I want to work, given the constraints and how I would want to take care of my customer. We've told them this is not possible given what you've asked for and the parameters. So you need to come up with a plan B or C, and we're happy to help you with that. But plan A, goner, not going to happen. And the only reason I'm able to tell them that with confidence is that I went through the exercise. Now, they can go talk to someone else who can promise them the 8 to 10 hours to get it done. And maybe they'll be successful, but I was not. So that's option one. You can prototype on your own time before you even propose and quote, just to get a feel for what you're dealing with. And, you know, maybe if everything goes smoothly, maybe you roll a couple of those hours in the design step of your actual work because you've already prototyped it. So in theory, you're saving time on the actual project. I think that's perfectly ethical. Next, you can say, well, we haven't done this specific thing before, so we would like to propose a design and prototype phase. So before we quote you for actually delivering, we will quote you to design and prototype this solution. Now, I would typically not do this with an 8-hour project. This is more on the 40+ hour projects where you're like, well, we have some known technical risk here. We need to prototype these key items and prove that these things work and identify the issues, because there will certainly be issues. Very good approach. Done it before, and it's been very helpful. And if everything goes smoothly, you have your prototypes that you then roll into the actual deliverables. Not a problem. And it helps you refine your estimate for your actual deliverable proposal or your project proposal. So that's worked well as well. Now, sometimes, even if you prototype, you get in the actual project and you run into technical risks that's like showstoppers and, you know, the whole V19, V20 thing. Very real risk. So I was thinking, well, should we put a technical risk clause in our proposals? It is not our fault that something broke between Business Central 19.5 and version 20. Breaking changes happen. Sometimes they're known, sometimes they're not known. Microsoft may make some change and they may not even realize this broke. So someone needs to be responsible for that, right? I can say, hey, this is a known risk. I can't take responsibility for what might break or how long it might take to resolve those issues. So let's have a technical risk clause. Customer, just be aware. Even if we deliver flawlessly on 19.5, something else may come up later that is no fault of yours, no fault of my own, and we'll just need to deal with it, but we're willing to work with you to make that happen. Okay. Another one is, well, we may come and run into 7 different issues with this project, and that may cause this project to be canceled, to fail, to be 3 times budget, whatever. We will let you know via change request. We'll just stop work, and you have to make the assessment whether to continue or whether to abort, go to plan B, plan C, whatever. Just have that awareness through a technical risk clause that your customer is very aware of. I think that's probably prudent. Related to the Business Central version upgrades, I'm now thinking a future version contingency clause is probably wise. Make that explicit in your agreement. Look, we cannot control what happens with a version upgrade. And customers may kind of implicitly know that, but if you've been in this industry long enough, some customers are totally reasonable. Some customers are not. And they say that is unacceptable. You should have known that this could have broken with an upgrade, and you should have taken care of that for me. Well, as you may know, if you're in the technical space, that's just not possible oftentimes. So a future version contingency clause just clarifies that potential issue and makes it clear who is responsible in the relationship. And maybe you have a budgeted contingency line item, and the customer says, well, I don't want to be fully on the hook for this. Can we work something out where I prepay for this or something to that effect? That, whatever works for you and your customers. And the reason that I want these things is I want to have a satisfied customer at the end of the day. I don't want to, sell an 8-hour project and, rub my hands together just waiting for all the technical risks so that I can build them 24 or 48 hours. That's just, they're not going to be happy with it. And I therefore won't be happy. I want a happy customer. And if I warn them, hey, we think this will take 8 hours, but it may actually, if we run into problems, it could go to 24. And if it does, we'll let you know each step of the way the problems we're running into, and we can decide whether we go with a plan B, abort, whatever you want to do. I want to produce customer satisfaction. This particular scenario that I've been describing, I'm producing it before I even propose. I'm saying, look, yes, it's taken me 3 weeks to get here, but I'm not going to deliver the solution you asked for. I'm just not going to do it because I cannot guarantee that it'll even work. And even if we do a custom API, even if we do this, even if we do that, I'm seeing all these other risk factors for what should be a very simple project. And I don't think it makes sense to spend 40 hours on a 10-hour project. I say go for plan B. Use a different tool, use different integration points, use a different process. Do not use these components because I think they represent too much risk for you. You're welcome to ignore my advice, but I'm not going to propose on this at all. It's just not worth the risk to me to produce satisfaction. So good question from Drew. How do you keep this from making you gun shy about approaching certain BCI projects, such as APIs? Exactly. This is the challenge. If everything that you see, if every project you approach, you see all the potential risks, you might say, no, that's too risky. And obviously, you want to help your customers. You want to produce solutions. You need to make revenue. So that's kind of where these come in. It's like, okay, we can't avoid risk. So how do we mitigate that risk? How do we manage it? Just bring it forth. Say, look, there is technical risk. None of these things are guaranteed. So in this case, I did the prototype before I proposed or estimated. I took that on me. So that was my nights and evenings and weekends and calling in favors and asking people, am I crazy for this not working? And so I incurred that cost myself. So that's one way. The other one is you propose the design and prototype where the customer incurs the cost of that due diligence, right? And then you have these risk clauses where you agree who incurs the risk. So I think you can't eliminate the risk. You just need to say, look, there is risk. Be explicit about it. Don't try to pretend it doesn't exist. And then say, okay, there will be risk. Who owns that risk? How much are we going to share that risk between you and the customer? And sometimes you just have to eat some hours. My phone is talking to me. Sometimes you have to eat those hours, you know, and but I would like to kind of manage it and I don't think there's a single answer. But in this case, we're proposing not to use the Business Central Web APIs. Other people say, I can solve those problems. Well, good for you. You're taking on the technical risk, both present and future, of the BC Web API for this particular transaction. If you're comfortable doing that, great. I'm proposing the customer plan B. Use a different integration tool, use a different integration point in Business Central, such as web services instead of web API. And you could criticize that choice as well. Say, nope, that's a bad choice for these reasons. I get it. And then the fallback is configuration packages. Export your data as CSV, pop it into a configuration package, do it manually. Essentially, that's a very low cost, very low risk solution because we know configuration packages. We know they work. They're simple, they're reliable, but they're manual. But hey, say, hey, customer, do the configuration packages for 3 months or 6 months. Instead of hourly or daily, just do it daily or weekly, right? To minimize your manual effort. You're not bringing in individual transactions. You're just doing the financial posting of your sales invoices. So it's just the financial implications. So if you do it weekly, is that acceptable for the next 3 months until we see how these things play out with the web API, with Power Automate, with the connector, and you know, we'll prototype it in 3 months, and that'll be our solution. So that's my proposal. I am unwilling to accept the risks. I'm personally unwilling to expose the customer to that risk. And so if they want to find someone else who promises to provide that solution, I totally understand. So I'm willing to walk away from that risk for an 8 to 10 hour project. It just isn't worth it. My developer and I have been on 120 plus hour projects, and we have been absolutely destroyed by these technical risks. And the customer was unwilling to accept any responsibility for those. And they put it all on us. And we got to a phase where it was endpoint and we walked away just because we were unwilling to get beat up in order to get the meager revenue we were going to get. It just wasn't worth it. We knew the technical risks. We didn't want to continue that. The customer was unwilling to compromise. I'm fine walking away. So fortunately, I'm able to walk away and not starve. So that's what I do. So anyway, this is just sharing some thoughts on the reality of technical risks even for small, seemingly simple projects. And just, I don't have the answers. I'm just kind of proposing how might we manage technical risk responsibly for ourselves, for our customers, so that we're not unhappy, the customer's not unhappy, and at the end of the day, we can actually deliver a solution that works for the customer today and in a couple months or a couple of years from now reliably. So with that, be careful, watch the risk. Have a good one.
Good morning, sun.